Welcome, dear listeners, both familiar friends and curious newcomers, to another serene journey guided by your ever-watchful storyteller, Mooncat. Tonight we drift once more into the velvety embrace of twilight, where the world hushes itself into a quiet, gentle stillness, and the whispers of forgotten tales float upon the evening breeze. Settle in, find your comfort, and let the day's worries fade away like the last rays of the setting sun. Together we shall wander the Midnight Garden of Selûne, a place where moonbeams dance upon cobblestone paths, silver-lined trees murmur secrets to the stars, and every shadow holds a story. Tonight we follow the adventures of Zaelith, the Drow of rare charm, wit, and a most uncharacteristic sense of humour, as she navigates this enchanting nocturnal realm. Here she meets wise owls who speak in riddles, dances with the whimsical fae, and shares her cunning with shadow thieves. So breathe deeply, relax, and let the moonlight guide you. The garden awaits. Zaelith took a deep breath and let the cool, fragrant air of the midnight garden fill her lungs. The garden, bathed in silver moonlight, seemed to shimmer with its own ethereal glow, as if the moon herself had come down to earth to take root. Night-blooming flowers of every shade imaginable unfurled their delicate petals, turning their faces upward to drink in the light of their celestial namesake. A garden that only wakes up at night, finally, a place that understands me, she quipped to herself, her voice a soft whisper that seemed to blend seamlessly with the night breeze. Zaelith, it must be said, was not your typical drow. Most of her kin preferred the dark and dreary underground, where the sun never dared to show its face and the air was thick with the scent of damp stone and long-forgotten secrets. Zaelith, however, had always felt a peculiar kinship with the night sky, with its glittering stars and the silver orb of the moon. She was more at home beneath the open sky than she ever had been in the suffocating tunnels of the Underdark. Her adventures, many and varied, had all taken place under the watchful eye of the moon, and she had stories aplenty to tell. Zaelith was, by any measure, a striking figure. She possessed the ethereal beauty of a drow, her skin a rich, dusky shade of midnight blue that seemed to shimmer under the light of the moon. Her hair, long and as white as fresh-fallen snow, cascaded down her back in soft, silken waves. It moved like liquid moonlight, catching the slightest breeze and flowing with a life of its own. But it was her eyes that truly captivated those who met her, a piercing shade of violet that seemed to hold 1,000 secrets and a hint of mischief. They were eyes that could twinkle with laughter one moment and flash with cunning the next, eyes that seemed to see right through you and find your hidden thoughts, the ones you weren't even sure you had yourself. Her beauty was the kind that could make even the most stoic of beings forget their purpose. It wasn't just about her appearance, however. No, it was the way she carried herself, with a grace that was effortless and a confidence that was unmistakable. Zaelith moved through the world as if she owned it, or at the very least, as if she was prepared to negotiate a fair price for it. She had a way of turning heads when she entered a room, not just because of her striking looks, but because she had that ineffable quality of making the whole room feel just a little bit brighter, a little bit more interesting simply by being in it. And yet, beneath that captivating exterior lay a mind as sharp as a freshly honed blade. Zaelith was witty, with a quick tongue and a sharper wit, always ready with a clever retort or a wry observation. She had a knack for finding humour in the darkest of places, a trait that had served her well in a world where darkness was more than just a metaphor. She could turn a phrase as skillfully as she could wield her twin blades, and her laughter soft and melodious, like the tinkling of crystal goblets, could disarm even the most hardened of hearts. Zaelith was cultured and well-travelled, a rarity among her kind. While most Drow preferred the familiar shadows of their subterranean homes, Zaelith had always felt the pull of the wider world. She had spent her youth exploring every corner of the Underdark, but it wasn't long before the world above called to her the open sky, the fresh air, the endless possibilities. She had journeyed far and wide, from the bustling markets of Waterdeep to the ancient ruins of Myth Drana, collecting stories and experiences like some might collect precious gems. Her travels had made her as knowledgeable as she was cunning. She could hold her own in a debate with the most learned of scholars just as easily as she could match wits with a mischievous fae or outmaneuver a clever thief. She was a master of languages, fluent in the tongues of men and beasts alike, and she had a particular talent for diplomacy, a rare and somewhat unexpected trait for a Drow, but one she wielded with finesse. She had a way of making people feel at ease, of drawing them into her orbit and making them believe, if only for a moment, that they were the most important person in the world. But Zaelith was more than just a pretty face and a quick wit. She was also cunning, with a mind that was always 2 steps ahead of everyone else. She had a talent for strategy, for seeing the bigger picture and finding the hidden threads that connected everything together. She could weave a plan as intricately as a spider spins its web, always ready with a backup plan, and a backup for the backup just in case. She was the kind of person who could talk her way out of a dragon's lair with nothing more than a smile and a well-timed compliment. Her charm, however, was her greatest weapon. It was a charm that was as disarming as it was dangerous. She could win over a crowd with a single glance, make friends out of enemies with nothing more than a well-chosen word. Her smile was a thing of legend, a smile that could light up the darkest of rooms, warm the coldest of hearts, or, if necessary, convince a particularly stubborn guard to look the other way. She had a way of making everyone she met feel like they were the most important person in the room, even when she was clearly the one holding all the cards. And so Zaelith walked through the Midnight Garden of Selûne with the confidence of someone who had faced the darkest of shadows and come out the other side unscathed. She moved with the grace of a dancer and the poise of a queen, her violet eyes taking in every detail, her mind always turning, always thinking. She was a woman who knew her worth, who knew the power of a well-placed word or a well-timed smile. And as she strolled through the moonlit garden, surrounded by the scent of night blooming jasmine and the soft rustle of leaves, she couldn't help but feel a sense of peace, a peace that was as rare as it was precious, a peace that she had earned through a lifetime of adventure and cunning. Yes, Zaelith was a drow unlike any other, and the night was her domain. The cobblestone path wound its way through the Midnight Garden of Selûne like a river of silver, each stone glistening under the soft glow of the moon. As Zaelith walked, she could feel the cool, smooth surface beneath her feet, a sensation that was oddly comforting. The stones themselves were ancient, worn by countless steps over the centuries, their surfaces polished to a soft sheen that caught the moonlight and reflected it back in 1,000 tiny pinpricks of light. Each stone seemed to have a story of its own, a tale of the many feet that had trodden this path before her, from the soft, delicate steps of a midnight dancer to the heavy, determined tread of a warrior on a quest. The path was lined with silver-limbed trees, their branches arching overhead to form a natural cathedral of light and shadow. The trees were unlike any she had seen in her many travels. Their bark was the color of twilight, a deep velvety purple that seemed almost black in the dim light. But here and there the moonlight would catch a patch of bark, and it would shimmer like 1,000 tiny stars trapped in the surface. Their leaves, too, were unique, a soft silvery green that seemed to glow from within, as if they were lit by some inner light. When the breeze rustled through their branches, the leaves would whisper secrets to one another, their voices soft and melodious, like a lullaby sung in a language only the trees could understand. Zaelith reached out and let her fingers brush against the nearest tree, feeling the cool, smooth texture of the bark beneath her fingertips. It felt almost like touching the night itself, and for a moment she wondered if the trees were as alive as she was, if they too felt the pull of the moon, the call of the stars. The Midnight Garden was a place that held many mysteries, and even Zaelith, with all her travels and all her knowledge, had yet to uncover them all. The Midnight Garden of Selûne had always held a special place in her heart. It was a place of magic and mystery, a place where the lines between reality and dreams seemed to blur. It was a place where she felt truly at home, surrounded by the beauty of the night and the gentle, soothing presence of the moon. The garden had been created long ago, in a time when the world was young and the gods still walked among mortals. It was said that Selûne herself had planted the first seeds, using the light of the moon to coax them to life. Each plant, each tree had been chosen with care, selected for its ability to thrive in the soft light of the moon and to bloom only under her watchful gaze. According to legend, the Midnight Garden had been a gift from Selûne to the world, a place where mortals could come to find peace and solace, to escape the troubles of the day and find comfort in the embrace of the night. But the garden was more than just a sanctuary, it was a living testament to the power of the moon, a place where her magic was strongest, where her presence could be felt in every leaf, every petal. Over the centuries, the garden had grown and flourished, its beauty only increasing with time. It had become a place of pilgrimage for those who worshipped Selûne, a place where they could come to pay homage to the goddess of the moon and seek her guidance. And yet, despite its popularity, the garden remained untouched, unspoiled, its beauty preserved by some unseen force. It was as if the garden itself were alive, a living, breathing entity that cared for itself, nurturing its own growth and protecting itself from harm. And so, it remained Selûne's garden, a place where her presence could be felt in every shadow, every breath of wind. The moon watched over her garden with a protective gaze, her light bathing it in a soft silver glow that seemed to make the flowers bloom even more brightly, the trees grow even taller. It was said that those who walked the paths of the Midnight Garden could feel her presence, could hear her voice in the rustle of leaves, the trickle of water in the fountain. Zaelith had always felt a deep connection to this place, a bond that went beyond mere admiration for its beauty. It was as if the garden understood her, as if it knew her soul and welcomed her as one of its own. She had spent many nights here, wandering the paths, lost in thought, her mind drifting on the soft breeze. She had shared her stories with the trees, whispered her secrets to the flowers, and in return the garden had given her a sense of peace, a sense of belonging. She continued along the path, her steps slow and measured, her eyes taking in every detail. The flowers that lined the path were in full bloom, their petals glowing with a soft ethereal light, night blooming roses in shades of deep indigo and violet, their scent heady, intoxicating, mingled with the delicate white flowers of the moon lily, their petals shimmering like freshly fallen snow. Here and there, clusters of night jasmine added their sweet perfume to the air, creating a tapestry of scents that was both soothing and invigorating. Zaelith took it all in, her violet eyes drinking in the beauty of the garden, her heart full of wonder. She could feel the magic in the air, a soft, gentle pulse that seemed to resonate with her very being. This was her sanctuary, her refuge from the world, a place where she could be herself, where she could find peace in the quiet, gentle embrace of the night. As she walked, she could feel the weight of her adventures, of her many travels, slowly lifting from her shoulders. Here, in the Midnight Garden of Selûne, she could forget about the dangers she had faced, the battles she had fought. Here she could simply be. The path led her to a small clearing, where the fountain bubbled quietly, its water catching the moonlight and casting 1,000 tiny rainbows onto the surrounding foliage. She sat on the edge of the fountain, dipping her fingers into the cool, clear water. The ripples spread out in concentric circles, distorting the reflection of the moon. Yes, the Midnight Garden of Selûne was a place like no other, a place that had captured her heart from the very first moment she had set foot within its boundaries. It was a place of magic and mystery, a place where the night came alive and where she too could find life. As long as the moon hung in the sky and the stars twinkled above, Zaelith knew she would always return to this place, to the garden that understood her better than any other. And as she sat there, listening to the gentle melody of the water, surrounded by the beauty of the garden, she felt a deep sense of contentment, for in the Midnight Garden of Selûne she had found her true home. Zaelith's lips curved into a sly smile as she recalled another adventure, one that was less about dancing under the stars and more about dodging deadly shadows quite literally. The memory of her moonlit duel with the shadow thief played out in her mind like an old familiar song. It was a tale full of cunning, bravado, and a fair bit of improvised swordplay. Ah, the shadow thief, Zaelith chuckled, the sound a mix of amusement and mischief. Now there was a rogue with a particular grudge, quite the shadowy fellow if I may say so myself. She could still remember the look in his eyes, or at least what she imagined his eyes would look like if they weren't hidden behind that blasted mask of his. He was after me for a rather ridiculous reason, really. Something about me liberating a rather valuable gemstone that he had liberated first, she shrugged with a grin, the moonlight catching the twinkle in her violet eyes. I suppose he felt I'd stolen his stolen goods, which, in the grand scheme of things, makes me a thief of a thief. It's a complicated profession, thievery, very hierarchical. Zaelith had crossed paths with shadow thieves before, of course. They were a peculiar sort of criminal. The shadow thieves part illusionist, part burglar, and all-around nuisances. They had a knack for slipping in and out of places unseen, their footsteps as silent as a whisper, their presence like a cold breath on the back of your neck. They thrived in the dark, using shadows like cloaks, moving with a grace that could only be described as unnatural. And they had a particular fondness for shiny things. The more unattainable, the better. But this one, Zaelith mused, her fingers brushing against the smooth petals of a moon lily as she spoke. This one was different. He was persistent. It was not the first time she had encountered a shadow thief, but it was certainly the first time one had been so doggedly determined to make her his mark. Most shadow thieves were content to vanish into the night when their plans were thwarted, slipping away like mist on a breeze. But not this one. Oh no, he had a point to prove, a score to settle, and apparently nothing better to do with his time. She remembered the night clearly. She had been on the very path she now walked, the cobblestones cool beneath her feet, the air filled with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. She had sensed him before she had seen him, a flicker of movement in the corner of her eye, a whisper of shadow that did not belong. I knew he was there, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. lurking in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to strike. So I did what any sensible person would do. I pretended not to notice and led him on a merry chase. Zaelith had darted through the garden, her laughter ringing out like a bell, a sharp contrast to the silent figure that pursued her. It was all rather thrilling, really, she said, her smile widening at the memory. Like a game of cat and mouse, except in this case the mouse was quite capable of turning around and giving the cat a good smack on the nose. She had led him around the garden, weaving between the silver-lined trees, ducking under low-hanging branches, using every trick she knew to keep him on his toes. And all the while she had felt a strange exhilaration, a thrill that only came from dancing on the edge of danger. When she finally decided to confront him, it had been in a small clearing, the moon high above, casting long shadows on the ground. I turned to face him, she recalled, her voice filled with mock drama, and there he was, stepping out of the shadows like some overgrown bat, all dark and menacing. She had drawn her sword, the silver blade catching the moonlight, and had given him her best, most confident smile. Looking for this, I asked, holding up the gemstone. His eyes, or at least the parts of his face I could see, narrowed. The duel had been quick, as duels often are when one of the participants knows what they're doing, and the other is a shadow thief who's not used to his target's fighting back. He lunged, I parried, he dodged, I sidestepped. It was all very dramatic, very theatrical, Zaelith said, waving her hand in a flourish. And then, just as he thought he had me cornered, I stepped into his shadow and, well, let's just say he wasn't expecting that. Zaelith had used a trick she had picked up from her time with the Fae, a way to move through shadows as if they were open doorways. She had stepped into his shadow and reappeared behind him, her blade at his throat before he even knew what had happened. "Checkmate," I whispered in his ear, she said, her voice a soft teasing lilt. He dropped his dagger and vanished into the shadows, muttering something about cursed moon touched Drow. I didn't catch the rest. He was in a hurry. Now, standing in the same garden where it had all happened, Zaelith couldn't help but laugh. "Oh, it was such fun," she said, her smile bright in the moonlight. "A little dangerous, perhaps, but what's life without a little risk?" She paused, her expression turning thoughtful. "Back then I felt like I could take on the world, like nothing could touch me. I suppose I was a bit arrogant, a bit reckless. But now, looking back, she saw the duel for what it was, a lesson, a reminder that even in the Midnight Garden of Selûne, shadows lurked, waiting for their chance. But I've learned since then," she said softly, her tone more reflective. "I've learned that sometimes it's better to be cautious, to be patient, that sometimes the best way to win a duel is not to fight at all." Zaelith's smile returned, softer now, more serene. Still, she added with a wink, "I wouldn't trade that night for anything. It was one of the garden's many gifts, a chance to test my mettle, to dance with shadows under the moon. And what's life without a little dance, after all?" She continued down the cobblestone path, the memories of that night playing in her mind like a well-loved tune. Yes, the garden was full of secrets, full of magic, and she, Zaelith, had danced with shadows and laughed with the Fae, had tasted the sweet thrill of adventure, and come out the other side stronger, wiser, and a little bit more in love with the night. As Zaelith wandered further down the cobblestone path, her mind drifted back to one of her more memorable adventures. A night when the Midnight Garden of Selûne had revealed to her one of its more elusive secrets. She chuckled to herself, remembering the night she had stumbled upon the court of the Fae, a hidden community that was as old as the garden itself and twice as unpredictable. "Ah, the Fae," she murmured, her voice tinged with both amusement and a hint of caution. "A merry band of mischief makers if ever there was one. The garden is full of surprises, but none quite so enchanting or as dangerous as the court of the Fae." It had been a night much like this one, with the moon high in the sky and the garden bathed in its silvery glow. Zaelith had been exploring as she often did, letting her feet guide her down paths less travelled. She had pushed her way through a thicket of silver-limbed trees, the branches parting like a curtain to reveal a hidden glade. And there, in the heart of the Midnight Garden, she had found them, the Fae. They looked like a dream, Zaelith recalled, her voice soft with wonder. A dream woven from moonlight and stardust, with just a hint of madness thrown in for good measure. The Fae were a curious sight to behold. They were small, no taller than her waist, with slender, willowy bodies that seemed to be made of the same silver light that bathed the garden. Their skin shimmered like the surface of a pond under the moon, a soft pearlescent glow that shifted and changed with every movement. Their hair was like spun silver, cascading down their backs in waves that seemed to ripple and dance, even when there was no breeze. And their eyes, oh, their eyes! They were like pools of liquid light, deep and unfathomable, with colours that seemed to shift and change like the auroras in the northern sky. Zaelith had been mesmerized, her feet moving almost of their own accord, drawing her closer to the dance of the Fae. They moved with a grace that was almost otherworldly, their bodies flowing like water, their movements so fluid it was as if they were part of the night itself. They danced in a circle, their laughter a soft, melodic sound that seemed to fill the air, mingling with the scent of the flowers and the rustle of the leaves. It was a sound that was both enchanting and unnerving, like the tinkling of tiny bells or the whisper of a secret that you were never meant to hear. "But don't let their looks fool you," she warned with a wry grin. "The Fae are not all stardust and moonbeams. They are tricksters, each and every one of them, with a penchant for mischief that would put a fox to shame. The Fae were a curious blend of childlike innocence and ancient wisdom. They could be playful one moment, darting around like fireflies, giggling and whispering secrets to one another, and deadly serious the next, their eyes darkening like storm clouds, their laughter fading into an eerie silence. They were creatures of the night, creatures of magic, and they did not take kindly to intruders." Zaelith had felt a shiver run down her spine as she watched them, a thrill of both excitement and fear. She knew enough about the Fae to know that stumbling upon their court uninvited was both a great honor and a great danger. The Fae were known for their capricious nature, their moods shifting as quickly as the wind. One moment they could be laughing and dancing, inviting you to join their revelry, and the next they could be whispering dark curses, their eyes flashing with a malicious light. They have a temperament like a summer storm, Zaelith mused, beautiful and dangerous, full of light and shadow. One moment they're as gentle as a breeze, and the next they're as fierce as a gale. She remembered how she had stood at the edge of the glade, unsure whether to step forward or slip back into the shadows. That the Fae had sensed her presence, they always did. Their laughter had stopped, their dance had stilled, and they had turned as one to face her, their eyes glowing in the moonlight. Zaelith had held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest, unsure of what to expect. But then one of the Fae, a tall, willowy figure with hair like liquid silver and eyes like a summer storm, had stepped forward, a mischievous smile playing on their lips. "Welcome, wanderer," they had said, their voice like the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. "Welcome to the court of the Fae. Do you come to dance with us, or to steal our secrets?" Zaelith had laughed, her fear melting away like morning mist. "I come to do both, if you'll let me," she had replied, her own smile matching the Fae's. The Fae had laughed at that, a sound like 100 tiny bells ringing all at once, and before she knew it, she was being pulled into their circle, her feet moving to a rhythm she could not hear but felt deep within her bones. It was like dancing on air, Zaelith said, her eyes distant as she recalled the feeling. Their magic was like a song, a melody that wrapped itself around you, lifting you up, carrying you along. For a moment I felt as if I could fly, as if I could do anything. But she knew better than to let her guard down completely. The Fae were masters of illusion, and she was not about to be caught in one of their traps. She danced with them, matching their steps, their movements, all the while keeping a careful eye on their faces, watching for any hint of a change in their mood. "They were testing me," she said with a knowing smile, "seeing if I was worth their time, if I was clever enough to dance their dance," and it seemed she was, for the Fae had welcomed her into their circle, had shared their laughter, their joy, and for a brief moment their magic. It was a night she would never forget, a night when the Midnight Garden had shown her yet another of its secrets, a night when she had danced with the Fae and felt the true power of the moon's light. But I knew better than to overstay my welcome, Zaelith continued, her smile fading slightly. "The Fae are like a summer storm, after all beautiful but dangerous, and just as quickly as they had welcomed me, they could have turned on me." She had bowed out of their dance gracefully, thanking them for their hospitality, and had slipped back into the shadows, her heart still racing, her mind buzzing with the magic of the night. "And so I left the court of the Fae," she said, her voice soft with a hint of nostalgia. "But I will always remember that night, the feel of the moonlight on my skin, the sound of their laughter in my ears. The Midnight Garden of Selûne has many secrets, and that night it shared one with me, a gift and a warning." Zaelith smiled to herself, her eyes drifting to a cluster of moon lilies swaying gently in the breeze. Yes, the garden was full of secrets, full of magic, and she, Zaelith, was one of the lucky few to have danced with the Fae, to have felt their magic, their power, their beauty. It was a memory she would cherish forever, a reminder of the magic that existed in the world, if only you knew where to look. Her journey through the Midnight Garden took her to a small clearing where a fountain bubbled quietly, its water catching the moonlight and casting 1,000 tiny rainbows onto the surrounding foliage. She sat on the edge of the fountain, dipping her fingers into the cool, clear water. The ripples spread out in concentric circles, distorting the reflection of the moon. And then there was the talking owl, she chuckled, shaking her head. Now that was a peculiar night. She had been resting in the branches of an old oak, her eyes half closed, when the owl had appeared. It was a great horned owl, with eyes like liquid amber and a voice that carried the weight of centuries. It had perched beside her, looking for all the world as if it owned the tree, and perhaps it did. It had spoken to her in riddles and rhymes, its voice low and melodic. At first she had thought it was merely the product of an overly imaginative mind, but then the owl had begun to speak of things it could not possibly know, of her past, her adventures, her secrets. She had been taken aback, but the owl had merely blinked at her, its eyes reflecting the moonlight. Zaelith's thoughts wandered to yet another curious encounter in the Midnight Garden, a meeting that was, by all accounts, both feathered and confounding. It had been one of those nights when the moon was particularly luminous, casting a silvery glow that made the garden look like a landscape spun from dreams. Zaelith had been wandering, as she often did, following a whim that had no clear destination but promised the lure of something unexpected. And then she'd heard it, a soft hoot, almost imperceptible, carried on the night breeze. She turned her head, expecting to see some ordinary creature of the night, but instead, perched on a low-hanging branch of a silver-lined tree, sat an owl. But not just any owl, this one was wearing spectacles. Tiny, round spectacles that perched precariously on its beak, giving it an air of scholarly seriousness that was only slightly undercut by the fact that it was in fact an owl, and the owl was looking directly at her. "Well, well, well," the owl said in a voice that was both deep and decidedly haughty. "If it isn't Zaelith von Ori, the moon's own favoured troublemaker." Zaelith blinked. She'd met many creatures in her time, some of them even capable of speech, but none quite as peculiar as this. "Well, aren't you the feathered flatterer?" she replied, leaning casually against the trunk of the tree. "It's not every day I'm recognized by a bird with better fashioned sense than most humans." The owl hooted softly, which Zaelith could only assume was his version of a chuckle. "I have my ways," it said enigmatically. "And I know things, my dear, many things. For instance, I know that you prefer your moonlit duels over daylight skirmishes, that you once stole a cake from a fae banquet, and that you have a peculiar fondness for night-blooming jasmine tea." Zaelith was intrigued and, truth be told, a little unnerved. "Ah, so you're a bird with secrets," she said, tilting her head to get a better look at him. "And a penchant for tea gossip, not something you see every day." The owl ruffled its feathers, looking pleased with itself. "I am far more than a mere purveyor of gossip. I assure you, I am a keeper of knowledge, a collector of truths, and a lover of riddles. Riddles, you say. Zaelith's eyes sparkled with mischief. Oh, I do love a good riddle. Go on then, Featherbrain, hit me with your best shot. The owl cleared its throat, or at least made a sound that Zaelith assumed was an avian equivalent of such a gesture. Very well, it said, its voice taking on a dramatic tone. Here is one for you. I speak without a mouth and hear without ears. I have no body, but I come alive with wind. What am I? Zaelith tapped her chin thoughtfully, her expression one of exaggerated concentration. Speaks without a mouth, hears without ears. No body. She snapped her fingers, a wide grin spreading across her face. An echo. You're talking about an echo. The owl nodded, its spectacled eyes gleaming with approval. Very good, Zaelith. Very good indeed. But let's see how you fare with this one. It paused, clearly enjoying the moment. What has keys but can't open locks? Zaelith's face lit up with amusement. Oh, that one's easy, she said with a wave of her hand. A piano, or as I like to call it, a very expensive doorstop. The owl hooted again, louder this time, clearly enjoying the banter. You are as sharp as they say, Zaelith, it said, adjusting its spectacles. Perhaps even sharper. Zaelith grinned, leaning closer to the owl. And who, may I ask, is they? Who goes around saying things about me to spectacled owls in moonlit gardens? The owl merely blinked, its expression inscrutable. Oh, I hear things, it said vaguely. Little whispers on the wind, stray thoughts caught in the branches of trees, secrets murmured by the stars themselves. And I know, for instance, that you have a question for me. Zaelith raised an eyebrow. Do I now, she said, crossing her arms. And what makes you so sure of that? Because everyone has a question, the owl replied with a wise nod. Especially when they don't know they have one. Go on, ask away. I won't bite. Mostly because I have no teeth. Zaelith chuckled, the sound light and free. All right, wise one. Riddle me this. Then what's the meaning of life? The owl blinked again, this time with what looked suspiciously like exasperation. Ah, the classic, it said, sounding almost bored. You know, everyone asks that, but the answer is much simpler than you think. Oh, Zaelith leaned in closer, her violet eyes sparkling with curiosity. Do tell. It's 42, the owl said matter-of-factly, preening its feathers. But most people find that answer unsatisfactory, so I like to add a bit of nuance. The meaning of life, dear Zaelith, is to live it fully, freely, and with as much humour and wit as one can muster, which, in your case, should be quite a lot. Zaelith burst out laughing, a sound that echoed through the garden like a joyous peal of bells. Well, I can't argue with that, she said, wiping a tear from her eye, and here I thought I'd be getting some profound cosmic insight. The owl tilted its head, its eyes twinkling with amusement. Sometimes the most profound insights are the simplest ones, it said softly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a midnight seminar to conduct on the finer points of hooting. Good night, Zaelith. And with that, the owl spread its wings and took off, leaving Zaelith standing there, a smile still playing on her lips. She watched it disappear into the night, feeling a strange sense of contentment. She didn't know who or what the owl was, or how it knew so much about her, but she found she didn't much care. Some things, she decided, were best left as mysteries. An owl with spectacles, she mused, shaking her head with a chuckle. Just when I thought I'd seen it all, she continued her walk through the Midnight Garden of Selûne, her heart lighter, her mind filled with the joy of yet another whimsical encounter. In a place where moonlit flowers bloomed and shadow thieves lurked, a talking owl with a penchant for riddles seemed almost ordinary, almost. But then again, in Zaelith's world, ordinary was just another word for boring. And there was never a dull moment in the Midnight Garden of Selûne. In the end, I think it was more interested in my stories than I was in its riddles, she said with a wry smile. They had talked long into the night, exchanging tales and secrets, until the first light of dawn had sent the owl winging away, leaving her with more questions than answers. She never did learn its name. She leaned back, gazing up at the sky. The stars were out in full force now, twinkling like 1,000 tiny lanterns in the vast expanse of the heavens. She could feel the weight of their gaze, like 100 eyes watching her every move. But she didn't mind. If only all my nights could be this peaceful, she mused aloud, her voice barely more than a whisper. And this fragrant, she closed her eyes, letting the soothing scent of jasmine and the gentle rustle of leaves lull her into a state of deep relaxation. For a moment she considered staying in the Midnight Garden of Selûne forever, living out her days beneath the moon's gentle gaze, surrounded by the beauty of the night. But she knew herself too well. There were still adventures to be had, stories to be told, and the night, after all, was young. Zaelith stood, stretching her limbs, and took one last deep breath of the fragrant night air. She glanced up at the moon and gave it a wink, as if to say, until next time. And with that, she turned and walked back down the cobblestone path, her steps light and carefree, her heart full of wonder. The Midnight Garden of Selûne watched her go, its flowers swaying gently in the breeze, as if waving her farewell. But Zaelith would be back. Oh, she would be back. For the night was her playground, and the moon her constant companion. And as long as there were stars in the sky and stories left to tell, Zaelith would be there, dancing in the moonlight, forever chasing the next adventure. And so our moonlit wander through the Midnight Garden of Selûne comes to a gentle close. As the last notes of this night's tale fade into the whispering leaves, let us linger for just a moment longer in this place where night blooming flowers open only for the moon, and adventures are spun from silver threads of starlight. Thank you, dear listeners, both those who have journeyed with us many times before, and those joining us for the first time, for sharing this quiet, magical evening with me, Mooncat. I hope the stories of Zaelith have brought a little wonder to your night, a touch of mystery to your dreams, and perhaps even a smile to your lip. As you drift gently into sleep, remember that the Midnight Garden is always here, waiting beneath the moon's watchful eye, ready to welcome you back whenever your heart longs for calm and your spirit craves adventure. Until we meet again, May your nights be peaceful, your dreams be bright, and your path always bathed in moonlight. Rest well, dear friend. Until next time, yours in dreams and stories, Mooncat.